Пацаны, смотрите.
Russia has kinda taught everybody that a counteroffensive requires huge amounts of manpower, like a giant fist, and just go in one direction. But a Ukrainian counteroffensive looks very different. Ukraine won't use the tactics of the 60s and 70s of the last century. Ukraine hopes to degrade the invader's strength through a lack of supplies and a lack of ammunition that will make the Russians fight like they did in the first months of the war. Russian ears only open up when there's a giant military bat hitting the Russian head. These are the words said by President Zelensky's advisor, Mikhailo Podolyak, and that is how the Ukrainian counteroffensive to retake Kherson is being conducted. Unlike the Russians, the Ukrainians won't order their soldiers on suicidal charges toward enemy lines. They use artillery, HIMARS in particular, to lay complete waste to Russian ammunition and supply depots and command centers behind their lines. And as we have talked about before, the Russians simply cannot do anything about it. HIMARS are so much more advanced than anything the Russians have. They have no counter against them whatsoever. When a HIMARS opens fire, the target will be hit every single time. And the thing is, and this is important, every time the Ukrainians blow up a Russian ammunition depot or a command center, it means that the enemy have to move further and further away from the front line. It is not only causing them significant logistical problems, it is also demoralizing them. The Ukrainians are using this smart tactic to strangle the Russian forces in the Kherson region. It is no longer a question whether or not the city will be liberated, it is a question of when. As many of you are probably aware of, Russian-occupied Crimea has been hit by several large explosions. On August 9th, no less than 6 explosions hit a Russian airbase on Crimea's western Black Sea coast in less than an hour.
Мамулечка, давай, надо сваливать отсюда. Тихо, тихо, тихо. И потом, что надо, да, надо ехать. Нет, это уже какой-то трэш. Мам! Да домик ничего нам не сделает, твой деревянный домик.
Approximately 10 Kremlin aircraft were destroyed. We actually don't know exactly how these explosions happened, officially at least. However, my guess would be that it was HIMARS that did this. Besides laying waste to a whole Russian airbase, the attacks has also sent tens of thousands of Russian tourists into a full-blown panic. The Kerch Strait Bridge, built on Vladimir Putin's orders in 2018, actually had a record number of cars crossing it the other day, when close to 40,000 fleeing Russians drove across it. And while they are stuck in traffic, if they look out their windows, they'll see several weird-looking barges beginning to surround the bridge. The barges look like this, and they are a sign of things to come. They are a physical manifestation of Vladimir Putin's biggest fear right now, and let me tell you why. If you have been watching my previous videos on the Kherson offensive, you might remember I said this a few weeks ago. The Bridge of Death has to be destroyed. No questions about it. It needs to be done, and it is a completely legitimate target. This is being said not only by the Ukrainians, but by the Americans as well. Plans have probably already been set in motion to make this happen. And blowing up the bridge will not only be a huge military victory, it will also be a symbolic one. The bridge itself is the largest and most visible symbol of the illegal Russian occupation of Crimea. After the explosions in Crimea, a Ukrainian attack on the Kerch bridge seems more and more likely. Mikhailo Podolyak said this, and I quote, "So this bridge is an illegal object, permission for the construction of which was not given by Ukraine. It harms the peninsula's ecology and therefore must be dismantled. Not important how, voluntarily or not." End quote. Militarily, if the bridge is destroyed, resupplying their troops in southern Ukraine would become a logistical nightmare for the Russians. It would mean that most supplies would have to travel along the occupied territory, along the coastline stretching from Russia's western border and all the way to Kherson. Now that is a huge stretch of land, and much of it is only defended by 5,000 to 10,000 invaders. And that is a big risk to take. It would make Russian supply convoys extremely vulnerable to Ukrainian attacks. Remember the barges? They are actually part of Russia's Black Sea fleet, believe it or not. They are a very low-tech solution to make sure that any Ukrainian attack on the bridge will fail. The boxes on the masts are formed in such a manner that they in theory should be able to confuse incoming missiles' radar, making them miss their target. I really want to stress the in theory part here. Most of all, what these barges show us is Russian desperation.
Вообще не хочу уезжать из Крыма из-за лучшее. Как здесь классно вообще.
Привыкла, да?
Я привыкла здесь, как в своем доме жили. Настолько все душевно. По-домашнему.
While most of the talk at the moment is about the Ukrainian successes in the south, we must never forget that the heaviest fighting by far is still taking place in Donbas. Every new day equals a new Russian attempt to gain ground, using the same tactic of massive artillery fire followed by infantry assaults in several locations along the entire line of contact. The complete opposite of what Ukraine is doing. That is also the reason why Vladimir Putin has lost 45,000 of his soldiers. The Ukrainians are using smart tactics to eliminate enemy troops and destroy their tanks and armored vehicles, and in most places, when the Russians advance, they are sent running back to their own lines again. Here you can see how the Ukrainians have set a trap for the Russians between two burnt out vehicles. One of the main Kremlin goals in Donbas is the city of Bakhmut, and right now the enemy is standing in the outskirts of the city. If the Russians gain success in entering the city, the fighting would be brutal. It would probably be akin to the horrors we have witnessed in Mariupol or Severodonetsk. Further north, the city of Kharkiv was once again the target of Russian bombings. In the middle of the night and without warning, Russian missiles struck several houses and residential buildings. 17 innocent people had their lives taken away from them while they slept, including several children. And I really need to stress that the Russians are absolutely doing this on purpose. These missiles don't just fall randomly from the sky. The Russians who launched them put in the exact coordinates of where they will strike down. And let me tell you this. By now, the Russians know perfectly well that their evil methods of terrorism aren't working, but they still keep doing it, and it's just terrible. There's only one way to make this stop: make Vladimir Putin suffer a decisive defeat. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like the video, leave a comment, subscribe to my channel and click the bell button. I would also be very grateful if you would help me by sharing this video.